So, chapter 17 of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex is finally here, and it pretty much delves into Shikamaru's plan to defeat the Shinju, which isn't really conventional, and that's all I'll say. But we also have Boruto finally realizing that he can't trust Kashin Koji, which I mentioned in my video about future Boruto. So, we have a lot to discuss, but of course we're gonna start from the top. So the chapter cover features Araya and Yodo, who are members of Team Shinki. Now the title is a bit different since the name of the chapter is Wild Beast Cubs, which refers to the Shinju, so you guys will understand why it is when we get to that point in the chapter. But yeah, the chapter pretty much starts off with Sarada thinking back to Sumire's outburst about her not thinking about Boruto's feelings or even hers. And Sarada seems to be distracted by this, which Mitsuki takes notice of. Now, Konohamaru also noticed this and questioned if she was okay because of course, they're on a mission, and she kinda just says that she's sorry and that she'll focus on the mission. And if you guys have ever read any manga before or even Western media, anytime someone is called out for being distracted on a mission and they promise to focus, the most likely case is that they're going to get distracted and it's going to lead to something bad happening, which I think is going to play out here as well, but I could be wrong, we'll see. Now we also have Matsuri and Ryu observing one of Koji's toads, and Matsuri goes on to say according to the trees, which is really interesting, Boruto himself placed the toad here, so he was definitely here. And Ryu is a bit confused by this, which of course is placed here for the audience, and he goes on to say, what trees? And Matsuri goes on to say that they're everywhere, even deep below the ground. By using the trees' voices to track him, we'll be sure to run into Boruto, or perhaps his accomplice. Now the first thing that came to mind when I saw this was that maybe this is because the Ten Tails is pretty much a tree, so it has some kind of connection to every forest life, and since the Shinju stems from the body of the Ten Tails, then they should have that connection as well. But the issue with this is that Ryu doesn't seem to have that connection and he's kind of confused as to why she's able to do this. So obviously this isn't just a Ten Tails thing, and it's more so a Matsuri thing. I mean, even Yodo goes on to point out that Matsuri does seem to have sensory type abilities, so she might catch on to them very soon. But even then, this is a bit more unique than your normal sensory type ninja, so it might be a combination of her being tied to trees and also having enhanced sensory type powers. Though I do find it interesting that Matsuri didn't detect that Code was watching them in the Ten Tails dimension, and Ryu was the one who found out. So it kind of just led to us believing that Ryu had sensory powers, but this chapter implies that he doesn't and Matsuri does. So we'll see how that plays out. Also, I want to point out that this connection to trees might be due to the fact that Moegi, which Matsuri stems from, has the ability to use wood release, which is stated in the character profile. So this might be a combination of multiple things coming together, and that's why she has this ability. But that's all I'll say, we'll see how it plays out. Now Yodo then went on to question Konohamaru that if they take down Ryu and they get a hold of his thorn bulb, can they bring back Shinki? And of course, this was obviously explained to them before, but of course, they're just giving exposition so that we can understand what the mission is about. But yeah, Konohamaru goes on to say, apparently, if our intel is correct, we're operating on that premise at least. So it shows that Konohamaru is a bit apprehensive to the information because he doesn't trust where it comes from. And we get an idea why that is later on in chapter, but I guess we'll get to that part soon. So we have Yodo here, she says, I swear I'll do my best, and she has this determined look on her face. And Araya noticed this and pretty much calls her out saying that, Yodo, I beg you, please don't do anything reckless. And again guys, whenever this happens in story, this always leads to the person doing something reckless. So of course, we can expect Sarada doing something that distracts her from the mission and leads to something happening that shouldn't have happened or the mission failing. And we can also expect Yodo to do something that she shouldn't have done. For example, trying to kill Ryu a bit too quickly. And I'll explain why later on in the video. But yeah, Yodo gets a bit testy here and she says, quit telling me what to do. I'm gonna do whatever it takes to, of course, rescue Shinki. And she then pretty much goes on to tell Araya to shut up or she'll shut him up, which I think is very interesting here, the dynamic between these two characters. But yeah, this character was mean from day one, and if you guys remember Yodo from part 1, she was always like this, so this isn't surprising. But Konohamaru tries to control the situation and tells them to stop. The last thing we need is you two fighting. And she says, sorry, we're always like this, it won't affect the mission. And again, it won't affect the mission, the same thing Sarada said. And I can guarantee you guys, and you guys can hold me to this, okay? I'm gonna place a bet. I don't know what the bet is, I'll follow up in the stream, but I'm gonna place a bet that there's a 99.9% chance that both Sarada and Yodo messes up the mission by doing something they shouldn't have done, okay? I could be wrong, but I'm just gonna say that might happen, but again, we'll see. But yeah, Konohamaru goes on to clarify if everyone understands the mission, and Mitsuki is kinda doubtful. He's like, I wonder if it will work, and Konohamaru says, "Don't start now, we've come too far to not proceed, let's go." And that's when you see Team 7 approach the Shinjus, and they kind of left the Sand Ninja behind. And I just want to say that it takes some serious balls to just walk up to these Shinjus and be like, "Yo, what's up over there? You too, what's going on?" You know, these Shinjus, who I think are apparently at least Jigen level in power, I would assume, these entities are insanely overpowered. And because I didn't view the extended spoilers we got yesterday, I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know why they felt comfortable doing this, but of course they explain it later on in the chapter and it makes perfect sense. But Konohamaru is pretending not to know that these guys are the Shinju, and he introduces them as Konoha Shinobi and claims that they're looking for the rebel Boruto. Ryu then says, "It seems like they don't know who we are. So what's the plan, Elder Matsuri?" And that's when you see that Matsuri isn't really acting accordingly. She seems to be smitten by the untold riz of one Konohamaru Saratobi for some reason, okay? She's pretty much blushing, and she goes on to say that I'm feeling a bit off and tells Ryu to do the talking. That's when you get a flashback to Shikamaru pretty much explaining the plan to Konohamaru. So he goes on to say that your mission isn't just to take down the divine trees. It's critical that you also collect their Thorn Soul Bulb. I believe you've seen one before. It's the thing that appeared when Hidari was defeated. He then goes on to say that if they return them to their trees, which is the person they devoured, then we can bring back Moegi and Shinki. The intel itself is solid. Matsuri's Thorn Soul Bulb will restore Moegi and reuse Shinki's. He also then went on to confirm, which was I guess confirmed already in the prior chapter, that if they don't retrieve the Thorn Soul Bulbs, Matsuri and Ryu will keep resurrecting, which is what happened to Hidari. So he pretty much knows that Hidari has been resurrected, or at least he suspects this, because he says that it is likely after being questioned by Konohamaru, which I find interesting since I don't know why he says it's likely when they have Ada to just look, but I guess it's probably the case that Ada doesn't want to look because she's scared, so he has to just assume that what Koji tells him is true, which is a bit scary, but that's all he can do at this point, to be honest. Now Konohamaru of course tries to question him about how he came by this intel and says that this is way more information than what they gleaned from Boruto's interrogation. But Shikamaru goes on to say, "Sorry Konohamaru, but that's way beyond your clearance," which is insane since he's the advisor to the Hokage. But you know, he has to do what he has to do. He then goes on to assert his dominance as the Hokage by saying that he judges the accuracy of any intel and how much of it is disclosed. And he also went on to say that he has a strategy in mind on how to fight them based on intel. And that intel is obviously Koji's, since it shows a toad hiding within his cloak. Now then goes on to say that the divine trees are monsters possessing high combat abilities, and they each have a target such as you and Sarda who they seek to devour. So naturally, we have no choice but to consider them as foes. Yet this antagonistic relationship is relative. There's no conclusive evidence that these divine trees are inherently or intrinsically evil. What I'm trying to say is that, in my personal opinion, they seem similar to newborn offspring of wild beasts, which of course is the title of the chapter. He then goes on to say that I don't think they have any true evil intent, at least for the time being. So he sees them as merely animals that react on instinct, which is true to some extent. Now he also adds that because they have dangerous strength, they pose a great threat to us humans. So this then leads into Shikamaru's great plan to defeat the Shinju, which is to become friends with them. He then goes on to tell Konohamaru to win them over, tame them, while these beasts are still innocent cubblings, and then he should betray them. He then goes on to say the obvious, which of course Naruto wouldn't take this route, but I'm not him. I propose this tactic to get rid of these superhuman monsters for the survival of humankind. So he pretty much wants Konohamaru to become friends with them and show them that he's on their side or they're not enemies, and then betray them when they're not looking. And I think this plan could work, but I feel like we know as the audience that it won't work, and this will lead to something bad happening. And I know I've been saying that the entire video, but I've seen this before in multiple other forms of media where a plan like this doesn't go as planned and they don't get what they actually want. I feel like what's gonna happen is that they're going to try this with Ryu first, and because he's a bit more intelligent, he's not gonna buy into the BS, but he's going to let them believe that he did, and he's going to defend himself, and then someone is going to die. I feel like that's gonna happen, but again, you know, I could be wrong, but I want you guys to remember me saying this because I feel like it's going to happen 100%. but we'll see. But we then switch back to Konohamaru interacting with the Shinjus, and he's still pretending as if he doesn't know who they are and tells them that he wants to join forces. Now, Ryu seems to defer a lot to Matsuri because he believes she's his elder and he respects his elders, as seen in the prior chapter. But at the same time, Matsuri doesn't seem to be in the best headspace here because again, she's blushing at Konohamaru and she says, sure, I guess. They also proceed to investigate Boruto's toad, and Mitsuki seems to find a piece of metal that belongs to Boruto, which he uses to teleport to with Flying Raijin. But at the same time, I feel like they didn't actually find it there. Mitsuki just pretended to find it because it is a part of the plan to separate them. And I don't know, like Ryu is so funny because everything they say, if they claim something, he's like, for reals? For reals? For reals? He's like one of those like new gen kids, you know, they love to talk that way. And I'm not saying that as if, okay, I'm not an unk, okay? I'm in my 20s. Calm down. I just think it's kind of funny. Now, Konohamaru then suggested that they separate, you know, and split up into different groups so that they can find more clues, which makes sense, you know, towards the plan, of course, but we all know what's happening here. And he tells Sarada to team up with Mitsuki and Ryu, along with the members of Team Shinki, to go find clues in that direction, while, of course, he remains with Matsuri. So, it's gonna be Matsuri and Konohamaru and, you know, the other guys doing whatever they're planning on doing. Now, Konohamaru then proceeds to approach Matsuri, and she seems to be blushing still, and she's like, you know, I'm having trouble breathing. Why? What's that? What's wrong with me? Sarada then calls Ryu and tells him that they found something that might be Boruto's over that way. And of course, Ryu's like, for reals? Maybe Boruto is still in the vicinity. Now, Ryu, of course, seems to be a bit concerned about Moegi or Matsuri because she's, you know, still blushing and acting weird. But Konohamaru tells him that he shouldn't worry and that he's going to work with Matsuri. Ryu then says, what a relief, you Konoha ninja are seriously nice peeps, just like I was told. He then says, Elder Jura is full of respect for ya. You know, honestly, I've been intending to slaughter any ninja I run into, so I'm glad we spoke first. And Sarada then says, gee, don't say stuff like that. Now, I do find it interesting that even though they're new beasts that were just created, you know, new entities, that why did he have the inherent need to slaughter every ninja? Now, if we're assuming that they don't have any intent whatsoever, why is his base instinct to kill any ninja he comes across? And this wasn't the doing of Jura, because Jura told him that they're nice people. So this seems to be something inherent with Shinki. So who knows, maybe Shinki has some like not so pleasant feeling towards the ninja society, and that will somehow play out later on, but we'll see. Now, Shikamaru goes on to tell Konohamaru that there's a reason why I picked you for this mission. Do you know why you're Matsuri's target? It's because she has romantic feelings towards you. Although it does seem like Matsuri herself is not aware of this, or rather, she has no idea what the emotion she's feeling is. And it makes sense, you know, she's a newborn, so she doesn't understand, you know, the meaning of love or attraction. So that might explain why she confused her feeling some sort of connection to Konohamaru to her need to devour Konohamaru. And I kind of mentioned this in my prior video that it seems that Jura was kind of instigating them to want to devour the person they had the deepest connection to, which means that if it wasn't for Jura, they might not have come to that conclusion. So I do find this a bit interesting. It also points out that the reason why Jura wants to consume Naruto is because of that connection to Naruto and the Tail Beast. And you guys might say that it doesn't make sense, since even if there's a connection to Naruto and the Tail Beast, this is a completely different Ten Tails. And I do think that makes sense as a criticism, but I want to point out that it is stated in Naruto's databook that every Ten Tails, or the Ten Tails, is a fragment of a larger entity, which is the God Tree that birthed the universe. So it implies that every Ten Tails stems from one being, which is that one massive God Tree. So it could be the case that they have that inherent connection. So even if Naruto is just connected to one Ten Tails, he's also connected to every Ten Tails through that one Ten Tails. And you know, it might sound crazy, but we have seen this done in other forms of media. This isn't anything new, okay? But even so, I could be wrong, so you know, we'll see. Now, Konohamaru is, you know, a bit iffy on the situation. He's like, you know, isn't that a bit much, you know, to kind of prey on her feelings for Konohamaru and then use it against her? You know, he isn't that type of guy. But Shikamaru tells him that I told you, be heartless. Divine trees are our enemy. According to our intel, either Matsuri or Ryu will show up. Worst case, the two of them together. Facing both at the same time will not go well for us, so you'll need to find a way to separate them. Now then switch back over to Konohamaru talking to Matsuri, and he tells her that you look like you need a break. Want to sit down and talk? She then seemingly agrees, and they go to have a talk, of course. And Konohamaru says, well, are you feeling any better? And it's just so, you know, it's so weird, though. She's just sitting there like a normal girl. She's like, you know, I don't know, you know, it just isn't me. And Konohamaru says, You sure about that? And she doesn't respond, she just looks away and she's still blushing, of course. And he then goes on to say that he doesn't think it's weird that she gets this way, of course referring to her blushing when he's in her general vicinity. And that's pretty much where the conversation ends in this chapter. We then skip over to seemingly Kashin Koji telling Ada that he wants to know what's happening in the sand. Can you take a look right now? She then goes on to ask him, what about that geezer, which is referring to, of course, Bug, because she's concerned that Bug can see her from that dimension. And as I pointed out in the spoiler review, this pretty much confirms that Mamushi is the only Shinju that has the ability to perceive her Senringan powers, or to perceive Ada when she's watching them using the Senringan, because he's the only one she's concerned about. Now she then of course takes a look in the sand and relays that information to Kashin Koji, and Koji then tells Boruto that it's going well so far, or at least they've succeeded in separating them, and Boruto says what happens next. Koji then says that Konohamaru is keeping Matsuri occupied. Ideally, Sarada and the other three will take Ryu down first, as I predicted. Then they should pretty much team up with Konohamaru to defeat Matsuri. Now this is where it gets kind of interesting, because Boruto then proceeds to question Koji about what's the chance of them failing, percentage-wise, and Koji goes on to say, not that high, so he doesn't give an exact answer, and Boruto says, don't lie to me, I asked for a number. And Koji replied saying, either way, you're not to go Boruto. Just like with Himawari leaving Konoha, if you were to take part in this battle, Jura would make a move, and if that happens, you will die this time. You are the one thing we cannot lose. And this of course goes into what I said in my prior video on the future Boruto stuff, which is that Koji is prepared to sacrifice anyone for the future he deems to be the correct one. So that is why I didn't tell Boruto that Himawari was Jura's target, even though he knew that was the case. That's why I didn't tell her that he had the Nine Tails, because if he did, Boruto would try to protect Himawari from day one, and that would have likely led to Boruto getting killed by Jura. So in this case, I feel that Boruto is starting to understand that he might want to protect everyone and save them, but Koji wants to save the planet, that's it. So if he has to sacrifice Boruto's loved ones, he will do it. So it's gonna be interesting to see how Boruto navigates this, because he does need Koji, but at the same time, do they really share the same interests? Of course, we'll see how that plays out soon enough. Now we then switch over to Jura entering the village, and he's in a bookstore, buying books, and for some reason, he has cash. Who knows? Like, it's so funny. Like, did Jura go steal cash? Like, he went to steal cash to come and buy books instead of just stealing the books. Like, it's so reductive. Like, just steal the books. I know Jura doesn't have a 9 to 5, so like, where did he get money from? Of course, he stole it. So bro is pretending to be an upstanding citizen because he's paying for the books, but where did he get the money? That's really interesting. But of course, we'll find out soon enough, I guess. But yeah, Shikamaru pretty much tells everyone, to leave him alone, let him do what he wants to do and just don't panic and just operate normally, and that's what the bookseller does. Now we then skip over to Amado in his office watching his one monitor that he's always watching, and as he's about to put his cigarette in his mouth, that's when Kawaki comes and grabs it and then pushes him against the wall using his scientific ninja tool hand. And I always found it interesting that Kawaki never just does this with his normal hand, like how someone would normally do it even if they have the power to do something else, but Kawaki just heavily relies on this scientific ninja tool hand to do every single thing. But that aside, Amado then said, I thought you might be dropping by, and Kawaki then goes on to say that I've got tons I want to say to you, but first you're gonna draw out all of my powers to their fullest extent, and that's where the chapter ends. So yeah, as I mentioned in my spoiler video, I'm not sure how this will work out, because Kawaki in his current state, even with his defense boosted, he was getting bodied by Boruto with one hit and two-piece by Jura, and getting knocked out by a garden snake with Mitsuki. So I do want to add context that of course he's in base, so you can't really quantify Boruto's punch, but you also have to look at it from a narrative perspective. Boruto says that Kawaki hasn't trained well after he punches him and he gets down by one punch, and we know that Boruto at that point in time also knew that Kawaki was limited, so obviously Boruto is taking that into account when he's talking trash about Kawaki. So I do think that even if Kawaki gets his limiters removed, like, he's gonna get a boost in attack potency and his physical strength, maybe even speed, but his defense or durability will either remain the same or get lowered, depending on if Amado took from his defense to add to his offense. But either way, it just doesn't look good for Kawaki from a defensive perspective, and Jura can still knock him out with two punches. So we'll see how that plays out, but of course I'm a bit worried, and we'll see what happens. But overall, I think it was a good chapter. Not much happened, of course. This is just explaining the plan and what they're gonna do, and hinting towards some subtle distrust you know, between Boruto and Kashi and Koji. Hopefully something big happens next month. Hopefully we actually get some, you know, fights and all that lovely stuff. But yeah, let me know your thoughts down below. What you guys rate the chapter, you know, 1, 2, 10 and whatever, and you know, we can have our discussions in the comments as per usual. And also, if you guys want to join the Discord, the link will be pinned in the comment section. Tomorrow or the day afterwards, I have a video dropping on Boruto Sage Mode, because you guys have been asking me like so many questions, well, you know, if Boruto is getting Sage Mode, and I'm making the final video, the only video explaining my thoughts on Boruto getting Sage Mode. So hopefully I'll see you guys on that one. But yeah, that's it guys, I'll see you guys on the next video. Peace out.